Okay, happy day, everybody, and welcome to Creative Conversations. Guahusi Victoria Lola Leon Guerrero, and I'm the managing editor of the University of Guam Press. Before we get started today, I just want to say a few words about who we are. The University of Guam Press is our local publishing house that advances regional scholarship, develops cultural literacy, and expands accessibility to knowledge about Micronesia by providing high-quality, peer-reviewed publishing services. We have a wonderful collection of local literature, children's books, academic publications, hiking and field guides, which can all be found on our website, uog.edu/UOG Press. You can always also find information about us here on Facebook or on Instagram just by looking for UOG Press. With really generous support from the Guam Economic Development Authority, we are very honored to support a community of writers that we call Mañe'lon y Mantitige, which literally translates into siblings who write together. This writing fellowship includes a variety of activities intended to support our Mañe'lu throughout their writing process, including peer review writing workshops and presentations and discussions with acclaimed authors and artists from our community through this creative conversation series that you're tuned into. The goal of Creative Conversations is to connect authors and artists and create a space for them to inspire and learn from each other. Today, our conversation is centered around an incredible author who is also a very dear friend. We actually began our publishing writing journey together as young reporters for the Pacific Daily News's 5-page when we were only juniors in high school, when I had the absolute pleasure of meeting Julian Aguon. Julian Aguon is an indigenous human rights lawyer and writer from our beautiful island of Guam. He is the founder of Blue Ocean Law, a progressive firm that works at the intersection of indigenous rights and environmental justice. He is brilliant, soulful, and deeply engaged in the struggles of peoples across Oceania to liberate themselves from colonial rule, defend their sacred lands, and obtain justice for a range of harms inflicted upon them by outside forces, from nuclear weapons testing and non-consensual medical experimentation to extractive industries and climate change. He serves on the Global Advisory Council of Progressive International, a global collective that launched in May 2020 with the mission of mobilizing progressive forces around the world behind a shared vision of social justice. Julian is actually a well-published author for our community. Previous to the book that we're going to likely focus a lot on today, he also published 3 other books, Just Left of the Setting Sun and The Fire This Time, Essays on Life Under U.S. Occupation in 2006. And then a couple years later, What We Bury at Night, Disposable Humanity. Julian's law firm also notably made history the week of his most recent book launch when they had submitted on behalf of local organization Protehi Texan, Save Ritidian. They submitted a letter to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples specific to the ongoing human rights violations under U.S. colonization and militarization, and the continued disregard for the Chamorro people's right to free, prior, and informed consent in regards to the transfer of thousands of military personnel and the construction of a live fire training range complex and other installations on a site of great significance to our people in northern Guam. His submission successfully prompted UN Human Rights Council members to send a joint allegation letter to the US government concerning these serious human rights and indigenous rights violations that the Chamorro people have suffered. This is the first time something of this magnitude has occurred, and this announcement was made the exact same week that he launched his incredible book that we are so honored to have published here at the University of Guam Press, entitled The Properties of Perpetual Light. The Properties of Perpetual Light has already received tremendous international acclaim, including from 2 Pulitzer Prize winning authors. Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, described the book as a powerful, beautiful book. Its fierce love of the land, the ocean, the elders, and the ancestors, warms the heart and moves the spirit. Junot Diaz, also a winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and author of The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, said that it was a breathtaking book, and I mean it. This book took my breath away. The Properties of Perpetual Light is so alive with passion, wisdom, and heart, you can almost feel its pulse. And just quoting from one of our fellow Micronesian authors, Kathy Jetno Kitchener, author of Iep Jaltuk, Poems from a Marshallese Daughter, she says, Aguon is one of Oceania's most important thinkers who uses his ability to see through complicated systems to fight for our islands and peoples. And so I could likely talk this entire hour about the amazing, groundbreaking work and writings of Julian Aguon, but I'd like to give him some time to introduce himself and say a few words to our writers, and then I'll go ahead and introduce them and we'll begin our creative conversation. Hafa and welcome, Julian.
Hafa, thank you so much for that generous introduction. And thank you all for being here. I am excited to hear your questions and to just chat with you about anything that's on your mind about my writing process behind the Properties of Perpetual Light, or your writing process behind the works that you are no doubt creating right now. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you all.
Maybe before we go into the fellows, if you could kind of say a few words too about kind of how do you feel? You launched your book about a month and a half ago, and what has it been like?
Yeah, the process has been pretty amazing. Like right before this call, I got like a very long email from another complete stranger, basically, saying that in Europe, saying they're an international climate change expert lawyer. I mean, they work on the climate change and human rights law, and we've never met. And it was just a perfect example of what, I don't know, the ways in which the book is surprising me, because I wasn't really prepared to impact people from all over the world. I kind of primarily write for our people here, for the world as well. I mean, the book is really about Guam, but it is a commentary about the world too. But it's really kind of amazing to be flooded with messages from people all over the world. Chamorros from here, or just anyone born and raised here, diaspora, people who, the whole families who have left, who are now reading the book in like little reading groups in California and elsewhere in the US, and then from other countries, like Canada, New Zealand, India. It's just kind of mind-blowing and humbling, that something I put out there is being so enthusiastically embraced by people all over the world. It's really quite nice.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous good time, I think, the entire way. And so I hope that, we have more to come. And so let's just get right into it. These creative conversations involve members of our Mañe'lon Mantitige Writing Fellowship. And so the people that we're going to be in conversation with today are all in active peer review writing workshop groups that meet every 2 weeks to review each other's work and just be in conversation about our writing. And so I'd actually like to start with Julian Santos. Julian Santos is a copy editor at the Pacific Daily News, who is actively writing in one of our groups. Hafa and welcome, Juliana.
Hafa, so nice to meet you, Julian. I fangirled over you for the past few years, and I just finished your book, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. So I'm really grateful to be here.
I'm so happy you're here too.
So Juliana, do you have a question for Julian?
Oh, yes, I do. One of my favorite parts of the book actually were all of your footnotes. And obviously the whole book is great, and I have to read it again just to, I feel like, be able to process and digest everything that you included in there. But the footnotes definitely proved that you were able to find like a community of other writers or artists that sort of inspired you. And I love how we could see that and how it sort of fueled you in your own creative process. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Once I realized that part of my purpose with this book was to really inspire young people here and everywhere else to really reach deep, really like basically to try to sort of really examine their own lives, and their own experiences. I realized that one of the things that I could do that would be pretty powerful is if I can be really transparent with young readers about how that looked like for me. So the writers that really influenced me, including some musicians that really influenced me, books that had, I don't know, particularly significant impact on me. So for example, I just name some. I talk about really, basically a range of writers, but Alice Walker is one of them. I talk about how reading her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens really changed my life in undergrad. I talk about Louise Erdrich, the Native American writer, her book Love Medicine. I talk about other Native American writers, other Black writers. I talked about some Pacific Island writers from this region whose work really impacted me, like Apele Hau'ofa. One of my favorite books is Tales of the Tekongs. And so I told a story about how when I read it, I got so excited. In like a one particular scene, I almost peed in my pants, and I ended up throwing the book at the back of another passenger's head. So it was like, like it was basically I was squealing in light. But yeah, so I was like talking about that process. In some ways, I wanted to do that just so that there was no sort of like, I think some writers have a way of writing where they are primarily interested in craft, or they're primarily interested in, like crafting really elegant sentences, for example, or just like and I am too. I love a good sentence, obviously, but I think in our sort of hyper attention to that kind of detail, we sort of lose some of the other bigger points of what we're doing as writers, and I really wanted to keep my eye on the prize. I was writing it to help like other young people feel more free, and I couldn't help any of you feel more free if I didn't really sort of talk about my own journey to get there, including the hard stuff. So like I chose books and chose, I chose all these sort of influential writers in some ways, like Desiree said, my friend in the back of the book. I chose them, or I referenced them like points of light. I wanted, they lit my way, they help, pave part of the path that I'm walking. And so I just wanted to share that with you all with some sort of generosity of spirit. So that's why I wrote those footnotes in that way. And I think that's why they read very intimately, because I was really quite candid in my assessment of why I was so moved by different writers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a very beautiful part of your process that you so graciously shared with us, because I think it's really easy, especially as an aspiring young creative, right? I'm not that young, but there are other much younger creatives that can look at your history and everything that you've been able to accomplish and almost feel intimidated by it, right? Like you've been able to do so many amazing things and step into worlds that a lot of us can't necessarily imagine doing, just given where we're from and our own limitations in our minds. So it was like such a cool thing to see that somebody like you so humbly will just be like, well, this is where I got, this is who showed me this idea and helped me expand in this way. And I so clearly see the cycle of reciprocity in that, like you were inspired by these amazing people, and you're in turn inspiring a lot of other people as well, a lot of aspiring people that want to write just like you. So thanks.
I'm so glad that you get that. I really appreciate that you see that so clearly, because it just really matters to me. I mean, I don't know. I just think writing can function that way. It could just help. It could help everyone, move forward, move closer to freedom. It can be that way, but it isn't always that way. I mean, sometimes we have so many other writers, I think in some ways have lost their way, and they just, they're so busy being clever in a sentence or a paragraph or a book, and then they sort of lose the point.
There's a really interesting a really beautiful point that you make, like right in the beginning of the book about pain. And that I feel like sometimes can get lost in the process too, because a lot of us, like my earlier memories of writing were just for my own pain, you know? And you talk about how people who are in pain tend to inflict it on others. And so it's really interesting to see and read something that so vividly wants to express love from pain instead of express pain from pain. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and even to recognize the humanity in those that cause pain to you, right? I think that is actually very Chamorro in a sense, right? Where because we are so interconnected and from such a small place, like we have to reflect on our pain in that way and understand its collective nature, right? And that even in understanding actions that are done to us, it's like trying to really see the whole person. I think that's what I thought of. I know exactly the passage you're talking about, Jelena, and it's really about, you know, those who are hurt others. And I think that's a really important reflection, even in our own healing, right? Because forgiveness is a lifelong process. And so sometimes even in forgiving ourselves, we have to reach that deeper understanding. So thank you. I think also one of the things that you said that I remember feeling when when we worked on the first full draft, right, was I was like, Julian, I know this is a love letter to young people, but it is also a love letter to your favorite writers. You know, that's kind of how I felt coming out of it, because you know, I think exactly what you guys are talking about. It's that enough at Malik, right? That like writing, and I tell this a lot, you know, in classes when I teach classes, that our books are our best friends, right? And these authors have gotten us through some really amazing and also some really painful moments in our lives. And so I think for those that haven't read the book, when you do, it's a gift on so many levels, but the references page at the very end in and of itself is a gift, right? If you get every one of these books that he has referenced in this book, your life will completely change, because these are some of the most amazing books of all time. And so thank you for that gift that you gave readers as well in your references page. And so let's actually turn it over to another writer. We have Edward Afaji. Eddie is an English major with a writing and Chamorro studies minor at the University of Guam. And Hafaday, and welcome, Eddie.
Today, I just want to say thank you very much to Lola and EOG Press for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to be here. Today, Julian, I just, I'm completely starstruck and completely intimidated by just everything that you've accomplished. I've read What We Bury at Night for History of Guam before, and even in that text, I was just in awe. In this previous text, I wasn't able to fully devour it all in one sitting. I want so badly, but I'm currently taking classes, and student life is no life at all. So as my present to myself, I'm like just taking in little snippets every now and then, and it's just a treat every single time. I really appreciated Jelena's turn. There's this one part I can't quite remember right now. It's about I think it was the idea that we are I think I forgot it. Something along the lines of we are I can't quite remember, but when I do, I'll bring it up. I guess I just want to ask my question. It's kind of general, and I've overused it multiple times. It's getting stale, but recycling is good for the environment. So my question is, what advice do you have for young and up and coming writers in the islands? And then also, what advice do you have for developing their writing process?
Yeah, that's that's a really, really good question. And I'm going to try to answer it honestly. In some ways, I myself have bad writing practices, because, for example, I'm just being candid. They say that a writer, routine helps. those two words, routine helps, you know? So really like getting up, I remember like Toni Morrison, one of my favorite writers, you know, she was a mother of two and worked a full-time job. She had to get up at 4 a.m. exactly, sharp, you know, to like get in some really quality writing the beginning of the day. I have literally tried to do that a few times. I've succeeded on occasion, but not often enough. But I do think that that kind of advice really helps. And it doesn't matter obviously when in the day, but having sort of a daily routine where you set aside like a good chunk of time. And sometimes writers usually say the morning is best, but not for any other reason other than you're usually more clear-headed in the morning and you usually have a little bit less on your mind. As opposed to the end of the day, if the day's been a really bad day or really long day, sometimes you just want Netflix and just zone out, you know, or whatever it is, you know? But finding what works for you and trying to stay committed to that process, I think is helpful. You know, obviously you can study, like actually, you know, like what you're doing, you're an English major, right? So that and like learning and writing as much as possible. But I also think another thing that you're doing that's correct already, so you're already on the right path, is you're writing with each other. Like writing in some ways is such a lonely process. I mean, it's such a deeply personal process. And it's important that you go through that and work through that and really commit to that practice. But yet at some point you do need to like come up for air and make sure, you know, that like the, you know, that the animals in your forest in your head make sense to other people. So it's good to share them with others. And like, so from what I understand from Lola, like you guys are in an awesome sort of like peer review process. Like you read each other's work and give each other feedback. I think that's really smart, especially early on, because you can get a sense of where everyone's at. Another thing, God, sorry, I have so many little tidbits of advice. Feel free to throw them all out a high window if you want. If it's not useful to you, just ditch it. But I think another thing though is learning to trust your own voice. This is the most difficult of the things I've just said, because it does require a kind of intuition. You have to sort of trust your intuition on this. Like if you believe that a certain writer, for example, has such a different understanding of language, if you believe that their ear for language is so different from yours, don't ask them to maybe be your first reviewer, because that's the worst thing the worst thing we can do when we're first starting out. We just give over our gift to the butcher and they just, you know, slice and dice the hell out of it. And like, really, that was, you know, not what you needed in the beginning. In some ways, what we're trying to do is like figure out what you're trying to say, figure out what the sort of bones are of the story, or figure out what is the story. And in some ways, that's more important than the editing process, which can come later. You know, you want to be true to the story you're trying to tell. And sometimes you're the only one who can tell that story. So you kind of have to trust yourself, you know, to like, you know, to keep your own story intact before you let some other people take a red pen to it. So it's kind of like a dance, you know, you have to meet it's like somewhere in the middle there. The answer is somewhere in the middle. Does that make sense? Because trust me, and I see this from someone who gets stuck. I know that you're thinking, oh, I'm accomplished and this book is great. But I think it would help you to know, I mean, as like, you know, as aspiring writers and you're working on your books, I mean, it's a process. I mean, you know, in the beginning, sometimes I am so stuck. I'm stuck before I even start because I have, it's like the inner editor in my head. I'm like, no, that's not good enough. I'm already sort of attacking my sentences before they're even really written. And I was like, that's, you know, a process, you know, you kind of just have to keep writing and powering through that before you start hacking away at it, you know, getting the story out.
Thank you so much. I actually just remembered what Jelena said earlier. I was just writing it down. I don't know how exactly it came about, but I remember her mentioning something along the lines of like learning, like your like the text itself, properties is there's so much learning in the text, like especially like knowledge from our own culture. Like there's this one of my favorite stories in there is Mugu. It cracks me up every time. The first time I read it, I loved it so much. The idea of I've heard of that before, and I just thought it was a really cool thing to include, and especially the way that you formatted it, it cracked me up. So I like the way that these little parts of our culture that we take for granted, the knowledge of having that you've translated that into the book, and like this shared knowledge and everything it's become universalized. It's become like shared amongst like other writers, and I just think that there's something just incredibly beautiful there, and I just want to share that.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. I'm glad that you like that piece. It's one of my favorite ones, you know, in part because it is a little raw, you know, and it's not pretty. You know, the idea of taking a dog's, you know, eye gunk and rubbing it into your own eyes, you know, there's nothing pretty about that, right? Like, and it's just one of those pieces that just had to be in there. So Lola helped me in the end, you know, there was some discussion about that piece, but I'm so happy that, you know, it's there and it's even placed where it's placed, you know? So I'm glad
I love
that
that it's not pretty. I love that it's not pretty. It's so good.
Yeah, me too. I think what Julian means is that he had received some criticism from early reviewers that were like, oh, this might be a little too much. And I was like, no, it's not. I think this is good literature. This is what makes good literature, right? We need to see the entirety of somebody's grief. And that was part of this young boy's grief, Julian's grief as a 9-year-old, you know, and things 9-year-olds do to try to make sense of such an enormous loss, like the loss of his father. Are going to be raw and they're not going to be pretty, but others that have gone through it will see themselves in it and have, you know, like that's one of the things. I think you read Mugu. Mugu was the first piece he publicly read on KUAM's The Link, and it really resonated. It resonated then, and a few of the listeners had commented about it. Even my mom was like, oh my gosh, I can totally picture that, you know, and she's like, those poor dogs. But she loved it. So yes, thank you. So we'll go ahead and go to Megan. Megan's high degree is an English teacher at Southern High School, a poet, and actually just a well-versed writer. Hapade and welcome, Megan.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Hi, Megan.
I went to your book signing and I got both of my books signed. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So my first introduction to Julian's work was through this book. And I saw when I picked up this book, I really thought it was going to be something like this. But I was so surprised when I saw like the poetry embedded in there. So my question is, what was the concept between adding both poetry and the prose and just mingling it with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, again, I've said this before about this book, but I'll just let you all know. In the beginning, you know, I was just kind of writing. I didn't really set out with like a full-blown agenda, you know? So I didn't say, oh, I'm gonna sit and write. It wasn't disciplined in that way. I was just processing like loss. 2020 was such a hard year. There's deaths, unemployment, suicide was on the rise. There's one suicide in every 6 days. When I was writing that book, there was one suicide every 6 days. It was just very intense, you know? And you can find the PDN article from September that tells you that statistic. But yeah, no, I was like, we have so many things, you know, that we're feeling and everything. In some ways, we just don't even know how to process it. And a lot of our grief in some way, like some of it's individual, but a lot of it's collective, you know? So it's like, how can I write in a way that like would be helpful, that feels responsive to the world that we live in right now, the world we wake up to in the morning every day, you know? And so I just started writing different pieces, and I realized that I wasn't trying to impose all of this sort of discipline on the project from the beginning. I allowed myself to kind of just, you know, feel the walls of the cave as I went blindly in some way in the beginning, you know, and filling it out and realized that, wow, I kind of want to say different kinds of things to the reader. And I want to say them all at once. And I want to be really sort of greedy with that. You know, I don't really want it to be a clean little thing, you know, like a prepackaged good, you know, that's been like sort of perfectly, you know, tied up with a bow. I wanted it to feel like there was that certain things can be said. Like Mugu was an example, right? Like there was aspects of it, right? And some of the questions have these like openings in them that I was like, oh, they're kind of great. Like Mugu ends with sort of a question, but then doctors don't know everything. you know, and it's like, that could have, that, you see how I kind of like, I raise all of these things for the reader and kind of smash the reader's face up against this sort of grief and this child's processing of grief, but then you kind of leave it open, you know, and then go with the moon, you know, like, and then some of the different choices, you know, like even like to emphasize a child's sort of worldview over an adult one, to prioritize the child over that. For example, like the last sentence on Go with the Moon says, never, ever have I seen something so quietly, so alive. I could have easily crafted that sentence and by deleting the ever, because technically, right, it seems cleaner to say never have I seen something so quietly, so live, but never, ever. It has like, it has the whole beating heart of a child. It is emphasis, you know, and it's the same thing that happens in More Right. If you really think about that, it's also like an ode to a child worldview too, because it's like, I say in that sentence, he was right, of course, but my aunt was more right. It's like, you know, like we often don't even pair those words together, but it had to be, I wanted to like sort of celebrate, you know, this, a child sort of questions, you know, and like big open heart and open imagination. So I left some gaps, you know, and in some ways that's what I thought made it special, you know. And so me and Lola during the editing process, we talked about all of these insane amounts of conversation about all of these little tiny choices, you know. But I just thought it was important. And I think it sort of related to your question about the different form. Like there were a few things, right, that I thought poetry could do that the others couldn't do, you know, like Gausali, right? It's just to end the book with a poem. And I think, you know, like my whole life, I have always, even for as many years as I've considered myself a writer, I have felt weakest in poetry. I have felt least comfortable in poetry as a medium, right? And I was like, even that choice, you know, because something about that poem felt so correct. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt, that poem is so, it's almost sublime. I think it's the best poem I've ever written and possibly will ever write. But to end it with that, just because it's like, it's also like personal. It's like I'm ending on what I used to think was my weakest limb, you know, and I'm standing so proudly on that limb at the end, you know, and it's quite triumphant in that way. But you as a reader wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that I felt weakest in poetry, right? Because I'm even ending the book with a poem. So it's just a bunch of choices, you know, that were some personal and hidden, the hidden meaning behind things, you know, that you as readers wouldn't know. And there are the other things where there's gaps, or there's like something's not entirely settled. And it's like, I've raised questions that I haven't entirely answered. And that's part of it. And that's okay. And that's part of my political point, you know, behind my larger political message is that, you know, the very smallest of things are connected to the very biggest of things. And we don't always have closure or certainty. Those are luxuries that people who are so deeply colonized often do not have. We are not free, but I'm trying to write a book that moves us closer to freedom. You see?
Thank you. I just want to point out, like, it was so beautifully constructed between the poetry and the prose. And even in your other forms of writing, you can tell that you're very poetic in that sense. So I wouldn't even like think you were bad at poetry or that was your weakest link, because it's so wonderfully crafted.
Thank you. Lola always gets mad at me when I'm like, she says I'm too harsh a judge of myself, but but it's good though that you know that we all go through it. Like we're all literally just swimming in the same, you know, sea, you know, and we're just, you know, there's just endless possibility. There is, like, I cannot wait to see what you all, you know, are cooking. You know, I want to taste it.
Can I just add too that the footnote on that poem was also like, it was short, sweet, and a little bit sassy as well.
Yeah, you totally get, you guys, you all get this book really well, I can tell. Like that footnote was so important to explain who it's for and why.
Yeah, it was really interesting, the whole process of the footnotes, because basically, you know, that was something that through kind of the process of the book's evolution, it was like, hey, like, allow the footnotes to be where you get to just express yourself freely, right? Because oftentimes footnotes are, they're in the margins. Sometimes people just gloss over them, right? And oftentimes when you think of us as a people living in a colony, we are often the footnote to someone else's history. And like, it's really interesting the way footnotes are utilized in literature, right? And so we had a few great examples of others who have done this, but it was kind of like, some of Julian's pieces had already been speeches or already been published elsewhere. So you really can't change that very much, but he was able to break free in the footnotes and really transform and utilize the footnotes to really just give his own point of view, to be sassy, to kind of bring especially young readers more closely into really complicated issues. And so I love them too. I think the footnotes are really brilliant. But I also love this idea that your own book can surprise you about what you are capable of. That, we both have a shared love for Alice Walker and her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And I just remember in the piece where she's talking about when she was writing Color Purple, and she had to actually go to different places. Like in the city, one of the characters came to her more loudly, and then when she went to up north in Northern California and like more of a cabin or in the woods, another character came more loudly. So this idea that we can't control our books, in fact our books kind of take the driver's seat, right, and tend to surprise us along the way. And so remember that in your own writing. Like, don't ever underestimate the power of your writing to just take off on the page in ways you didn't even know was possible. So I think Julian's book gives us that as a great example. Okay, next we have Marie. Marie Perez is currently living in Hawaii, where she is focusing on working on her writing. Hafa and welcome, Marie.
Hi, Hafa. Hi, Julian. Thank you for having this conversation with us and for all the advice that you've shared so far. And congratulations on your recent success. I'm really excited to get to talk to you. So actually my question, so right now I'm kind of interested in writing about, I guess I would say like sensitive topics, like kind of in the context of like modern Micronesian society. So I'm interested in talking about like abusive relationships and also like just sexuality. And then particularly in regards to like abusive relationships, sometimes I'm speaking from personal experiences, and sometimes I do get concerned about like how my truth would be received from like my friends or family or like even the community at large. And if you don't mind sharing, I was wondering how you have like navigated writing about like sensitive topics, or if you could share any advice regarding that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. For real. Because it's such a real one, I can only speak, from my own experience, I don't know, I don't know how to answer the question more generally, but just for me, I'm really comfortable with who I am now in sort of like every sense, but I wasn't always, and so I'll give you an example from the book, Nikki and Me. Nikki and Me is the piece about me and my friend Nikki, on the bus, and we stood up for a Chuukese boy in the bus, and we both got thrown off, and we had to walk all the way home, and so that's like a piece that really is so important to me. But because that's like, it's like a coming out story in a way, it's like, oh, I'm saying that I like boys, and that scared me, and she was almost raped, and that scared her. And we had both been processing a suicide of our friend. So like, it was like a lot of tough stuff, like you're saying in some ways, but I guess my truest answer to that question is that I was ready to write about it. You have to be ready. Does that make sense? It's not a literary answer. It's an emotional one. You have to be ready to write certain stories. You have to be ready to tell certain stories. And I wouldn't force I wouldn't force myself. In some ways, you guys, I just want to be clear too. Like, in some ways, I'm treating a subject, right? And the reason why it feels so sure-handed, the writing in certain pieces, like even the writing Nirmal Hriday, which is talking about my time in India working for Mother Teresa, if you really close your eyes and think about that, I had 20 years to really process that one experience. And I came out with this super short, what is it, 3 pages? So short. Maybe 4 pages. It's a short entry, but it does a lot of work, right? It's like in so few words, I was able to tell a story that was about like all these huge topics, like they're difficult and I struggled with these things. But the only reason I was like, in some ways I felt so comfortable writing it is because I was so ready and I had so much time to think about them, So for example, I would have found it much harder to write about things I was going through now. Like if I was personally writing, in some ways the book is like a memoir, right? It's backward looking. It looks back at these experiences. And I've already had the benefit of adulthood, of fully processing all, sort of the range of emotions I had with every experience, So that's something. Like, one is be ready, and 2 is, it depends on what you're writing. And I'll say one third thing: fiction. Fiction sometimes is the answer. Sometimes you tell more truth in fiction. Sometimes you actually feel more free. Friction really frees you in some ways. You can take all of the same ideas, but you couch them, in other, like another setting, different names. I mean, that's just another way to do it. And I myself haven't even been brave enough to like enter that particular, fray, but I intend to enter fiction. I do. I feel more ready now. But I've been very terrified of fiction for many years. But I feel now that I could do it. And I feel like I had to write this book first. This book had to be written.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I agree. I think like being like, I guess like maybe I'm like emotionally ready would be like a really like wise advice as well. And also your point about fiction, because I think what I was concerned about was just like, when writing about something about that's like, personal, like I was also, it's almost like that kind of like, Mañe'lon, like, oh my gosh, like what are people gonna think, about me, or like, where, the things that I've been through. But I think yeah, you're right. Like, maybe like fictionalizing it can be a way to like kind of give myself more freedom when I write and kind of break down that personal barrier for me. That could be like something that I could definitely consider. Yeah. So thank you so much for your advice.
Well, you're so welcome.
Diva. So our last fellow that is with us is Johanna Salinas. She's a poetry lover, freelance journalist, and middle school reading teacher. Hafa day and welcome, Johanna.
Hafa day, everyone. Hafa day, Julian. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Johanna. Oh, I think she's frozen.
Uh-oh, Johanna.
I just thought I should let go first. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
There you are.
Okay. I was just saying that like Lola is the one who helped introduce me to your reading like 11th grade when she was my teacher. So my question for you is so I really loved your poem about Sherman Alexie. So I was just wondering, like, because of the notes you put there, how can like a writer tell the difference between like gatekeeping and genuine criticism that that their work or like that my work just isn't ready to be published? Like if someone in higher ups, like an intellect or an academic, is giving me feedback, how can I tell that they're just not telling me stuff to bring me down or to gatekeep? Thank you.
Wow, that's a hell of a question, Johanna. Wow, that's so deep. I can't possibly answer that other than to say I trust my intuition. But I just feel like I've lived long enough, and I know, I just know when someone is just absolutely full of shit, and when they're not. I know, sorry, but no, I just know now. I just know, and I trust myself. I mean, but that's something you earn over time. You learn that over time, how to really trust your intuition. I now I use my intuition for professional decisions for my firm as well as personal ones. But yeah, you're gonna have to that's something that we all have to figure out for ourselves. I mean, the only thing you could do other than that is sort of like take stock of the evidence, look at the facts. Like, is there a pattern with this mentor? or with this older intellectual or writer or anyone, would-be mentor? Is there a pattern? Like, have you seen any sort of fruits of their labor? For example, has that writer really encouraged other younger, lesser known writers to flourish underneath them or not? Because oftentimes, like that's the telltale sign too. I mean, because, people like writers will encourage other writers, they will help them get published, they will connect them to an agent or publisher. I mean, and again, it goes back to intuition though. Like once you're being strung along, you're never that confused about what's happening. At least I'm not. I feel like after 2 times around the merry-go-round, I'm pretty clear, if someone's just yanking my chain or not. So like, I guess you just have to sort of trust yourself to know. And of course, check the evidence out and also confirm with trusted friends and colleagues in your profession. Suss it out, vet the person, And of course, just, sometimes like someone will hate your work, but they just won't understand it at all. And that's totally okay. You just have to know that, no, they're wrong. You just have to like tell yourself that they're wrong. Yeah, I do that sometimes. I'm like, sometimes people give me advice. I was like, no, you really clearly don't understand this. So I just move on. I'm like, and I guess that's kind of snobby, I guess you could say, but I just know myself. I know my mind, I don't need, people to confirm whether or not it's good. Usually when I'm approaching others for advice, I'm not asking if it's, oh, is this great or terrible? It's a more particular sort of narrower question, because I know my worth. And that's something that if I can encourage you all to do is 1, to lean into your intuition more, perhaps. And 2, to just believe in yourself enough to know, and even when you're starting out a project, like you don't always know the destination. Sometimes you're just boarding a train with a ton of good faith. You're going to trust yourself to get someplace beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I just got to keep that in mind. And yeah, I don't know, like maybe I should just walk away sometimes, or yeah, like
Oh, for sure. You
question
should
the person.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, Julian, especially because, I mean, it kind of brings us full circle back to earlier in the conversation about know the book you want to write, and know what you're not willing to compromise, because then, you'll understand kind of, the feedback that you need that will help you make it the book you want it to be. And the feedback that really it's like, okay, thanks, that's great, but I don't need that, right? And that's okay too, right? I mean, you want to be surrounding yourself with readers that are honest, because sometimes I think people don't know how to give feedback, right? Sometimes people don't want to let you down or don't want to offend, right? So first and foremost, you want to find someone you trust enough that they are on your team, they believe in your book, they understand the vision of your book, and they want to help you actualize it. Then you want to know the ones that are just kind of being haters and are kind of like, just trying to stop you, right? And so it's kind of on a spectrum, and then sort of everything in between. And I think one of the great things about our writing community, about Mañe'lon and Mantitige, is that I think from my experience with all of you, it's been very supportive. And I think we've been all writing together now for a year. And so we all kind of have a good sense of what each of our goals are and how to help each other progress to that. We've seen enough of each other's writing. And so we've become a community we can trust. Right? Sometimes it takes reading someone's writing for a while to really understand where they're going. And then you can actually start to give feedback. I think in the beginnings, it's like, okay, what can I say about this? And I don't want to offend. And the other thing, like, especially when we're talking about writing that's deeply personal, it's very hard to give feedback sometimes. So, just exactly what Julian said, trust your own instincts, be aware of what you want to accomplish, and take what helps and let go of what doesn't, right? Nobody's going to come back around and be like, you didn't use my feedback, I hate you. No, they're going to understand. We have some really wonderful comments coming in on Facebook. Maria Hernandez says, I used to love writing from a place of vulnerability. And I feel that was when my writing thrived, but I'm now a very private person. How do writers bridge the gap to move readers when they don't feel like sharing parts of themselves? So inspired by your piece, Mugu, it takes bravery to share something so intimate with the world. So that is a really powerful question, right? Like, how do you move readers without having to kind of open up your soul in this way, right? If that's something you're not comfortable with. I think Julian kind of answered it a little bit with fiction, but is there anything else you might want to add to that?
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I just have to, I think I want to chew on the question a little more. What do you think, Lola? What do you think about the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are moved by lots of things, right? And so I think that first and foremost, I think it is important to write, you know, it sounds like in this case, right, like absolutely writing from a place of vulnerability is its own form of healing. So first and foremost, we write for ourselves, right? It's our way of expressing, it's our way of processing. How we transform that to share with the world really does have to be within our own comfort. And so when you feel ready, you can share it. If you just write it and keep it, and maybe one day your kids discover it, that's its own beauty too. So I don't think we have to feel this pressure all the time to have to write to change the world necessarily. I think even some of, like Julian was saying, some of the best books are books that aren't necessarily political in content, but more so in nature, right? The act of writing is its own political action. So characters can move people, humor can move people, sometimes even more so than the vulnerable content that's difficult to face. So it really just depends, you know, on what you want to do with your writing. Yeah.
Some of my favorite books, you know, I mean, it's just for me, like I didn't get to put everything in a footnote. Obviously, there's so many more books I've read and so many more books I love. I'll just tell you all now because we're just sharing. One of my favorite books from earlier in life was Like Water for Chocolate. No doubt, that was one of my favorite books. And there's a scene where the sister is like really coming to the rescue of her sister, right? And she brings her oxtail soup. She makes, and the sister was so numb. The sister was so numb to all like everything she had lost. I mean, she was so unmovable. You know, she was so like a zombie basically. And she gets this soup, and she literally, it's like a game changer in the book. It's just one scene, right? And you realize as a reader, you're like, wow, this is the most beautiful thing ever written, because it's one loving gesture, you know, from one imperfect human being to another. It's enough to just to reset the world, you know, just one loving gesture. And there's this other scene that I love so much from Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera. And it's like, it literally, I don't even remember every detail about the book. None of that matters to me. The only thing that exists in the world to me is this one scene where the protagonist is given a meal, and he gently pushes his back, I think to his mother. He pushes the meal back to his mother and says, "I'm sorry, I cannot eat this." And she was like, "Why?" And he was like, "Because this meal has been prepared without love." I was like, oh, hell no. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't breathe. I couldn't breathe in that moment. I was like, wow, the power of like a single line of literature, you know, just like one sentence can do it for me, you know? So reach for that, you know, strive for that one scene or one sentence that conveys so much depth, you know, so much insight about the human condition. You know, that's what you're reaching for. That's what the best stories have, you know, just this thing, you know, it's this magical thing that can cross every single border, you know.
Absolutely. Gina Rojas also added on that she loves Mughal because you are not explaining, you are stating, no apology, no explanation, and none needed. And she added on a little bit later that she also loves the way you use humor to lighten such heavy topics, and also as a way for an out, or as an, you know, it allows people, like lets people know that it's okay, right? Lillian Cruz says, when you share something so personal, we feel honored as we read your work that you allowed us in. And then I'll read the last one. Tristan Quintanilla says he really loved Ocean Within and how it tackled fatalism. Growing up here on Guam, fatalism is way too common, especially in the South. How do we overcome burnout as activists in a world where idealism is constantly shut down?
Oh, wow, that's God. Who are all these people coming with the heat?
Tristan also was the one that asked you, like, I think 5 questions during your
Oh,
presidential
yes,
lecture series. He
that's
has the
Christian.
best
Wow.
questions.
He's on my ass like white on rice, man. No, this is another good question. Kind of ask it again.
Okay,
That's the last part.
yes.
Ah,
How do we overcome burnout as activists in a world where idealism is constantly shut down?
okay, there's a couple things to that. Overcoming burnout. One is it's good if you have a long historical imagination. I have found that to be very practical and very useful for me when I'm, whatever, we're suing the US military, we're filing to the UN, like all the things you rattled off at the beginning of the intro, which is like my actual day job, like fighting for all these really hardcore things, you're like talking about huge violations of human rights and all. It's just such serious stuff, and you're doing it and you're doing it, and I could feel burnout for sure. But I think part of what helps me is that I always sort of just like try to remember to place myself in history. I'm just one person who happens to be living right now, and all I can really do is be responsible for my own portion of this relay. There are people who came before and there are people who come after, and I'm just being a responsible ancestor in this way. I am leaving a legacy to the extent that it is one for other people, like a model for them, it's for that they can see and use to the extent that my life and the way I lived it can be an example for other people. Like that's helpful. I mean, you have to have a long memory. You have to have a long view, you know? I think burnout actually happens sometimes, and despair. I think they're sort of related, right? They're like cousins. But I think they both have the same thing in common. Like we get there, we arrive at their doorstep, especially when we lose our sense of time and how long it is and where we come from and how we've been struggling for this. Like, I mean, all we have to do is stop for a second and remember, the Chamorro Spanish Wars, all of those years of all of those fights. And you just realize, wow, that we have just been doing this for such a long time. And we come from people who we have inherited this legacy of resistance, and I choose my ancestors and I choose to embrace the thing like I did in The Gift Anne Gave Me. I'm embracing these two, like escapees from the leper colony as my ancestors of choice on purpose. It's so intentional. I was like, those are my people. Those are my people because they help me. The ancestors should be helping us, like they should be lightening that load in that way. Like they've given enough of an example about how to live well and how to struggle and how to fight, and also how not to lose our sense of wholeness and our sense of joy and our sense of, all of those things. I mean, another thing is, another answer to the question is just be aware of living a life that's too political, meaning that's almost wholly political. We still have to swim and eat good food and make merry and celebrate shit and be together. Like, I mean, we have to have all of those things. Otherwise, it's not really a life. Like being mad at injustice all day long and all night long is not a personality. That is just not enough. I'm not interested in that kind of life. And I really don't know anyone else who is. But as I see some young people, especially become activists really early on, I think that's what they're describing as burnout. This sense that they're putting it all on their shoulders and they think, oh, I have to do this. And that is unhealthy in some ways. And I think we need to also just remind ourselves that we're allowed to be joyful. All oppressed people are entitled to joy. And I think it's helpful to think about that.
Thank you. I think also I was especially moved by the ancestors you talked about from the leper colony. And I just want to read exactly for listeners who haven't read this piece yet, because we do. Sometimes we feel the burden of the world we're carrying on our shoulders so heavily, just daily life. Even if you're engaged in activism or not, it is heavy living in a colony, period. But these two were especially strong. The first was a woman known only by the initials JQT who could not walk. The second was a man known only by the initials LRR who could not see. Together, against all odds, the two managed to escape. The one carrying the other the one the other's eyes. So I just think that's such a powerful image, right? Like when we think about how much we struggle every day, and just imagining you know, a blind man carrying a woman who couldn't walk, who's telling him where to go to escape, you know, these, you know, to escape oppression and to be free, is just so powerful, because we can't do it alone, right? When you cannot see, I will guide your way. When I cannot walk, you will carry me. Like that's how we have to move in this movement, right? And whether it be to fight for justice for our people, whether it be to help each other tell our stories, we've got to be each other's eyes and legs. And when someone needs to rest, learn who to lean on. I think that's the biggest thing, right? I think if we continue to think that only we can do it, then nothing's going to get done. And that's really beautiful how you said, you know, just imagining yourself as taking a baton and passing it on, right? This isn't something that ends here. And we are so honored by the baton you have given our community in your book, The Properties of Perpetual Light. If you haven't read it yet, please do. It is really, really worth its praise. And it's something you can literally read over and over again. My best friend like keeps it in her purse. So it is that tiny to fit in your purse and revisit anytime you need just some words of wisdom. Julian, you have been a gift to our island and the world, and to all of us today as we, you know, grow together as writers and lovers of books. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you all so much for having me and for being here and breaking bread. I wish you all so well. I just, you know, I'm already a fan of your work. I haven't even read it, but I mean, from the quality of the questions, I can just tell that you have an ear for it and an eye for it. And I just can't wait to see what comes of your labor. So press on.
Viva! Adios!